Hi, this is Ed from Wright. Today we're going to talk about troubleshooting basic electrical issues in the field without any tools. Now, the progression of this video will be sequential, so you want to start from the beginning and make sure you've ruled out some things before we get to other symptoms later in the video. All right, so first we're going to talk about just general power and having power. And the things that we talk about in this video generally apply to all of our mowers. They have very similar schematics. Which is a platform switch holding a kill relay into the run position for the most part. But you always want to start here. There could be weird issues from a bad battery connection, so you want to be sure that your connections are snug and tight here. There isn't a lot of corrosion. And same thing with your power connection on the starter and your ground connection on the engine. You want to check that, rule them out. We're assuming that we're not checking the battery voltage because we don't have tools with us right now. But we start with that, just visual. Now, the second thing we do to verify that we have power is we turn the key on. And this machine's an EFI engine, so I heard the fuel pump come on there for a second. If this engine was a carbureted engine, underneath the carburetor here, you'd hear just this little click. There's a little fuel shut-off valve, and so when you turn the key on, that should click. That indicates that you have power, and if you have power, then you can rule out that there's an issue with the fuses or something getting to the main harness power. Now, right under here, there's a fuse box with a main fuse on it. Some of our other machines have two fuses that sit down beside the engine. There's one that's connected to a purple wire, which is your power fuse. And then older machines have a fuse in the yellow circuit, which is the charge circuit. Newer machines just charge straight from the regulator to the starter stud. But you want to check that fuse is intact. If you have a multimeter, there's little holes on the end of it, so you can check continuity. But otherwise, pull it out, take a look at it, and you'll see kind of a dark spot in the fuse snapped open. But if you turn the key on and you hear that click, you know that you have power to the system, and that's the number one thing. Now, in a no-start condition, where you turn the key to start, nothing happens. What we want to do is, it could be a few things. So we know we have power to the key switch because it came on, right? But it could be the contactor, the start contactor in the key switch going to the green wire. This green wire goes to a switch, brake interlock switch. In most mowers, it's up on the top. Some older mowers, it's down in the bottom near the pumps, but you'll know it because there's green wires in it. For most mowers and this type of equipment, if you see a particular color wire, that's going to be the same circuit across the entire harness. So orange is our ignition on circuit. So anywhere you find orange in the harness, generally that's what you're going to find. We'll start as green. So this switch is connected to the brake, and you have to have the brake on to start the engine. So check that. Also, the green wire passes through the PTO switch. So if you have the blade switch on, the engine won't start. You have to have this off and the brake on, and at that point you have power that goes through those components down to the starter solenoid, which is a green wire on the side of the starter. Now, if the engine cranks, then you know you have power to the starter. If it's clicking, then typically you either have a battery voltage issue, a charge issue, or you have a loose connection where the power comes on but it can't carry amperage because of a bad battery connection somewhere. Now, the starter could have failed. It could have either been the solenoid part of the starter or the motor part of the starter. If it's the solenoid, if the solenoid part's good, you'll hear it click, but the engine won't turn. And if on the motor side, sometimes the brushes do wear out. Some people will tap on their starter and get them to work, but I would suggest not necessarily tapping on the starter. If you tap on the starter, you can actually break the magnets off on the inside of it. So I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, so let's say the engine is cranking but not running. If it's not running, typically that's going to be because of a fuel-related issue. You could have a fuel valve that's shut off or a blocked fuel filter, something along those lines. You can easily check the fuel level here. Don't be surprised to see that the fuel filter is mostly empty. That's just the way they work. But you should see some fuel, maybe a quarter, a third full at least, in the fuel filter. And then you have your fuel valve. In this case, it's on the tank. That's off, that's on, it's marked on there. Some machines have a little inline shut-off valve as well. You want to make sure that's on. You got fuel going to the engine. Okay, so let's say that the engine runs, but as soon as you turn on the blade switch, the engine dies. If that's happening, then you know that it is somewhere in the safety circuit or the PTO switch. So if I pull this on and I step on the platform, I should hear the clutch come on. I hear the clutch click on and hear the clutch click off. Now, if that relay is not working, then that would typically be the branch wire that goes to the platform switch or the platform switch itself. Check the platform switch visually, make sure it's fully plugged in. Some machines, especially the early version of the standard intensity, this wire could get an internal fatigue, and so if you move the deck up or down, it would actually cause the engine cut in or out. But if you pull this on, you step on the platform, first you should hear the relay click. If the relay clicks, you know you have power going up to the clutch on relay. But if the clutch doesn't click, then you know that you probably have a clutch issue. If the relay is clicking and the clutch is not clicking, then you've got to check your clutch. Now, there's a few things that could be going on with the clutch. One is that the clutch, there's a wire going into the clutch, so that wire could be fatigued or broken or something like that. That'd be one thing to check. The other thing is that the clutch could just be worn out. So the gap between the clutch plate and the rotor there, and typically you know it's going to be a worn clutch if it works in the morning, but once it gets hot by midday, it stops working. The way these electromagnets work is that they're less effective when they get hotter. So if you see that where midday the clutch is taking a second to engage or just not coming on as regularly, your clutch is on the way out, you need to get another one on order. If the wire tends to be to have intermittent issues with the clutch coming on and off, but that won't kill the engine. If the engine's dying when you pull the switch, that's going to be your circuit that's somewhere between this PTO switch and the platform switch. Now, you can certainly do the diagnostics, but in terms of the value of your time, sometimes it's a lot easier to replace just one of these three components. If you verify that you have power on your harness and your fuse, but nothing's happening, it could be a key switch, and you replace the key switch. If your key switch comes on, the machine comes to life, you hear the click of the fuel valve in the carburetor, the fuel pump, you know this is good, and then it could be the PTO switch. If you pull the PTO switch and you don't get a response out of the platform, it's probably that. If there's no difference when you pull this on and off, it's probably the switch. Now, you can diagnose your clutch. You know, you don't want to just throw a clutch on something and realize that wasn't the issue. The way you diagnose a clutch properly is you go underneath, you unplug the wire, and you can connect 12 volts to it just to check that directly going into it, it works. You could also get an ohm meter and measure it. I believe it's supposed to be between like half to 3 ohms, something like that. And if it's shorted out, then it's not going to work. And if it's open, one of the wires is broken and it's not going to work. So you can do that. But really, it's easiest to just take a 12 volt power source, maybe from another battery, jumper cables, put it on the clutch and make sure it's clicking. But you don't want to replace the clutch only to find that, you know, it's a break in a wire or something like that. So hopefully this is helpful to you. I'm going to repeat myself one more time, just real quickly. Number one, check your power connections. Make sure they're tight. Number two, turn on the key. Listen for the fuel pump or the fuel valve. If they come on, you know you got power to the main harness. If they don't come on, check your fuse. Maybe you have a dead battery, maybe the battery's not charging, in which case that would be the yellow wire on the harness or the wire by the starter. Could be the regulator on the engine. So if it comes to life and it doesn't start, then make sure your blade switch is off, your parking brake is on, and at that point, it really could be this, the switch, or the starter. Now, if it's starting and running, but you pull the switch on and the engine dies, we know that for some reason this platform circuit's not kicking in. Most likely, it's the switch itself. Make sure the switch is all the way plugged in, the action is moving correctly there. You could also take the machine out of service and you could jump that circuit and check to see that it's making the relay click in. You don't want to run the machine like that, that's a safety hazard. but with the engine not running, you can check that. Okay, so if we stand on the platform with the blade switch on and we hear the relay click, then we know that the safety circuit's fine, but for some reason we're not getting power from here to the clutch. Could either be this relay, which is on the ground side of the clutch, or this, which is on the power side of the clutch. But most likely it's going to be the clutch itself is worn out or the wire in the clutch is worn out. So hopefully that's helpful to you. If you've got an issue in the field, hopefully you can look through this video and know where to start on some different things. We have another video that we break out the whole harness and how exactly everything works and using a multimeter. So you can also check that if you want to get a little bit more involved or have more time. Hopefully this is helpful to you. I know that electrical issues, we try to keep our harnesses as simple as we can. One relay, one fuse, because electricity could be a little bit mysterious. Sometimes it can be hard to diagnose, and it's one of those things that can keep the entire machine from running at all. You can't really limp through an electrical issue. So we try to keep them really simple, really reliable, more and more sealed connections. Sometimes we have redundant circuits, like our PTO switch has a bunch of contactors in it. So some circuits we run the wire through twice just because we can. But we know it's frustrating when you have an issue. I hope this video is helpful to you. Also, you can go to our parts lookup site if you scan this code right here, or if you go to the parts site, parts.renergy.com, and search your serial number and search the keyword like electrical harness or something like that. You'll see that attached to the part number for the harness is the schematic, so you can look through there and see where all the different colors go. Hopefully this is helpful to you, and hope you have a great rest of your season.